Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor, please subscribe if you haven't already. I know what you need, some more rock and read. Today we'll pick up where we left off with chapter 15 of The Lives of Brian by AC/DC's longtime lead singer, Brian Johnson. Let's see what happens next. If there was a moment when my first career as a professional singer came to an end, it was when I was at home one day in Preston Grange and heard a rap of knuckles on the front door. "Mr. Johnson, I presume?" asked the man in a bowler hat who I found standing on the mat. Before I could answer, a couple of big, nasty-looking lads appeared behind him, a brick wall of Geordie muscle, and my heart almost stopped. "My name is Mr. Such-and-Such, and I'll be your bailiff today," bowler hat man said, as I just stood there, my jaw hanging open. "Now, if you don't mind, these two nice young gentlemen are going to come into your house and secure your furniture as collateral, including your television, if you have one. Oh, and your fridge. And by secure, I mean remove. You'll get them back as soon as you settle your debts." By now, it was the winter of 1978, one of the coldest, bleakest, most depressing winters in the history of Great Britain. Non-stop strikes had seen rubbish piling up on the streets. Meanwhile, the IRA were setting off bombs all over the place. The winter of discontent, the newspapers were calling it, which seemed about right, if only to describe my personal circumstances. I hadn't had a gig in months, leaving me and Carol so broke we were back to choosing between heating the house or putting food on the table. And of course, the arguments at home were more ferocious than ever, with poor little Joanne and Kala, now about 10 and 5 years old, caught in the middle of it all. It had always seemed too good to be true that Redbus were willing to pay the mortgage on the house in Preston Grange, and now that I was looking at this bailiff in front of me, I realized that I should have listened to my gut. "What's all this about, then?" I finally managed to stammer, fearing the answer. "We've got a court order here on behalf of Leeds Permanent Building Society to seize collateral against your missed mortgage payments in the amount of £500, explained the bailiff, holding up a piece of paper with a signature and wax seal on it. "But I haven't made any payments," I told him. "Well, I admire your honesty," came the reply. "Most people claim the checks are in the post." "No, I mean, my record company makes the payments. Or so I thought." With the bailiff in the house, I managed to get Ellis Elias on the phone. "Hello, Brian. How fab to hear from you. Gosh, I'm terribly sorry about all this. There must have been a mix-up. Let me talk to this bailiff fellow." Thanks to Ellis's bull, I got a 48-hour reprieve. But there hadn't been a mix-up. Redbus had simply stopped paying the mortgage because I wasn't making any money. And the mortgage was in my name, as was the house, so I was on the hook for everything. I should have known, but I've always been naive like that. Next thing I knew, I was at Newcastle Crown Court. I got lucky in two ways. First, the judge was sympathetic to a guy who was about to lose his house and couldn't afford a lawyer. And second, Leeds Permanent sent this awful, slimy little puffed-up creep of a mortgage arrears guy to represent them. When the judge realized I wasn't making up the story about my contract with Redbus, he gave the Leeds guy a proper bollocking. "If Mr. Johnson owned and lived in the house, why did you keep sending letters to a record company on Water Street in London?" he scolded. "You knew 4 months ago that this company had stopped paying. So why didn't you go and see Mr. Johnson then? Why wait all this time and then ambush him, threatening to take away all his possessions and put him and his family out on the street? I think you did it because you just wanted the house back. You didn't want to give him a chance. Then the judge turned to me and said, Mr. Johnson, what can you afford to pay a month? The correct answer was, absolutely, Jack, Your Honor. But for some reason, I blurted out 70 quid. So, you're going to need to get a job, yes, he said. A real job, not as, a musician. Yes, Your Honor. Whatever you say, Your Honor. He banged his gavel. Leeds Permanent is hereby instructed to add the amount owed to the principal balance and draw up a new mortgage agreement with payments of £70 per month. And Mr. Johnson, you need to find employment, quickly, and don't ever miss another payment again. The satisfaction of defending myself and winning and keeping the house lasted for all of a couple of hours. That was when Carol said she was going out with the girls to celebrate, which somehow escalated into another argument. And it was just so obvious in that moment that we had no marriage left to save. That was when I finally realized that we had to call it quits. It just wasn't fair for Joanne and Kala. So I packed my bags, got into my car, now a very used and rusty VW Beetle with a 6-volt battery that could barely pull your cap off, never mind power both headlamps at the same time, and started to drive, slowly. There was only one place I could go, of course, number 1 Beach Drive. That night I moved back into the same room that I had once shared with Maurice and Victor, my dog-eared copy of the Morley method of scientific height development still under the bed. And when I got up the next morning and looked out over the slag heaps, railway lines, and the Vickers tank factory on the banks of the Tyne, I couldn't help but wonder how I had gone from appearing on top of the pops with Roger Daltrey to this. At the age of 31, I had lost everything. My marriage, my career, my house, although at least my daughters got to stay in Preston Grange with their mother. I can still remember the awful feeling of failure like it was yesterday. It was a horrible, confusing, draining time. I couldn't sleep. I could barely eat. I didn't even want to see my friends because I didn't want to feel their pity, or worse, accept their charity. Meanwhile, it was hard to watch other bands, given how badly I wished I was out there doing the same thing. But of course, I couldn't resist. And the funny thing is, the one band that I remember seeing during that period was AC/DC. Not live, but on Rock Goes to College, a series on BBC Two that showcased up-and-coming acts by broadcasting live gigs from various student unions around the country. There was a huge buzz about AC/DC, who had been playing at Essex University. People kept telling me, "You've got to see these guys." What a show it was. They were so different to everything else out there. I couldn't quite believe it. Angus was just manic. He must have only been about 22 at the time. He had the schoolboy outfit on, of course, and he did his routine to Bad Boy Boogie. As for the singer, he was a natural-born frontman with tight black trousers, tattoos up his arms, and what looked like a rum and coke in his hand. It didn't occur to me for 1 second that he was the same guy that I had met in Torquay. In fact, I wouldn't have believed you if you had told me. There was just no resemblance whatsoever. This was a rock and roll singer, not a folk guy. I loved every second of it. But of course, it was also a reminder that I had had my shot and blown it. I mean, at my age in the rock and roll business, unless you were already a star, it was all over. Like the judge had told me, It was time to find a real job. Even if I could have faced going back to Parsons, it was too late now. The place was a shell of what it used to be. I was going to have to aim lower. So I picked up a copy of the Evening Chronicle, the same paper that had once declared me a star of the future, and started to thumb my way through the job classifieds. "Windscreen fitter needed," said the first ad I saw, with a telephone number next to it. I can't even remember what the other jobs were on the page. I just saw the words windscreen fitter and thought, well, how hard can that be? I mean, I used to prepare drawings of steam turbines for power stations, where if you got a measurement wrong within 1,000th of an inch, you could cause disaster. Sticking a piece of glass to a car wasn't going to use up many brain cells. When I called the number, a guy named Peter answered. It wasn't the usual hello that you'd get from your usual Geordie working man, though. Oh no, Peter was in a different class, or at least he thought he was. "Good afternoon," he went in this very pompous voice, like he was a Concorde captain about to take off for New York. "This is Peter, Northeast Manager of Windshields Limited Company. How may I help you?" I wanted to beat my head against the wall and scream. But I needed this job badly, so I swallowed my pride and stayed on the line. Peter informed me that I'd have to attend a preliminary interview at Windshields Limited Company, roadside service Ford operating headquarters, which at the end of the call turned out to mean the passenger seat of his Ford Escort estate, which he would park in front of Bertley Services on the A1, about 15 miles south of Newcastle. I was actually relieved that Peter was based so far out of town, because that meant that there was less chance he'd recognize me. I mean, Geordie had been solid B-list celebrities in Newcastle for a while. Metro Radio were always playing our singles, especially Geordie's Losses Liggy, and Tyne Tees Television often featured us on a show called The Geordie Scene. And of course, I wasn't exactly hard to miss with my mass of curly hair. But now that I was going back to civilian life with my tail between my legs, I wanted to be invisible. The interview was early on a Friday. My biggest worry was that the Beetle wouldn't make it. The key had long ago snapped off in the ignition, so you had to do this trick with the handle of a teaspoon to turn on the ignition. It was raining that morning, of course. More than raining, in fact. It was like Thor the Thunder God was taking a piss after a night out, and it was all landing on me. And of course, the Beetle's floor had a hole in it, and each wiper went at a different speed, and every so often smoke would billow out of the front of the car, which was strange, because the engine was in the back. As promised, Peter had parked his Escort next to the entrance, so I pulled up behind it. Then I jumped out of the Beetle, wincing as the rain lashed down on top of me, and I tapped on his passenger window, expecting him to reach over and let me in. But nothing in my life was ever that easy. Peter glanced up at me briefly, put up his index finger, and mouthed, "One moment." I looked back at him through the window in just utter disbelief. I mean, every second that passed, another 10 gallons of rainwater were soaking through my clothes and filling up my shoes. I was like, what the do you have to do that's so important? You can't let me in your car. He didn't even have a phone or a laptop to pretend to type on. This was 1978. He just had a little notepad and a pencil. I tapped on the window again, trying not to make it sound as pissed off as I was feeling. This time, he didn't even bother to look up. By the time he opened the door, I looked like an unsqueezed chamois leather. "Okay then, Brian," he goes as water's dripping off the end of my nose, and I'm wondering if I'm going to end up with hypothermia. One of my many responsibilities here at Windshields Limited Company is to ensure that all prospective fitters have the skills and dedication for such a demanding line of work. So tell me, what qualifications do you have? I used to be a draughtsman, I told him, so I've got my city and guilds and my Tech 3 certificate. Surely, I thought, he's gotta be impressed by this. I mean, these were serious qualifications that took a 5-year apprenticeship and many exams to get. Oh, he said, looking back at me blankly, you sound a bit overqualified to me. Please, just get me out of here, I thought. Peter rang me that night to tell me he had given the job to someone with experience. Okay, fair dues, I told him, and hung up. Then he called back a few minutes later to tell me that, actually, the more experienced person had turned down the job because there wasn't enough money in it. So, would I still be interested in taking the position? A couple of days later, I was up at Windshields Limited Company's main warehouse in Darlington for a week of what Peter called training. Or, to use the technical term, learning how to replace a windscreen. They kept glass for every make and type of vehicle you could imagine at that warehouse, along with a fleet of beautiful white Ford Transit vans with orange lights on the top. When I first saw those vans, I have to admit I started to feel a bit better about the whole situation. I couldn't wait to get behind the wheel of one of them. The guy I had to follow around for the week was a man of very few words called Norman. He was probably only in his 30s, but he wore spectacles of the jam jar bottom variety and dressed like he was in his 60s. He didn't seem too pleased to have me as company. The first call we got over his walkie-talkie radio was for a Peugeot with a broken windshield at a garage near Bolden Colliery. So off we went in the van, in silence, until Norman grunted something about needing to stop at his house to pick up his lunch from his wife. So we drove to his house, in silence. Then we pulled up next to it, in silence. Then we sat there for a moment, still in silence, looking in through the window at his wife doing the dishes. Finally, he let out a sigh and said, "She's got a face on her like a bulldog sucking piss off a nettle. Stay here and keep your head down." This is going to be the longest week of my life, I thought. Over the days that followed, I discovered that replacing windscreens didn't exactly require the skills, dedication, and qualifications that Peter had suggested it would. The first time Norman let me help, instead of just having to stand there watching, he made me down tools halfway through the job so he could go for a slash, which I knew from experience meant a cup of tea, 3 tabs, a bowel movement, and a long look at page 3. But I got bored while he was gone and just finished it. I couldn't help myself. I was just so impatient to get going, to start making a living again. Norman looked at me like I was Judas when he got back. "What did you do that for? If you work at that speed, they'll just give us more jobs." I'm pretty sure that he stopped speaking to me after that. Although, to be fair, it was hard to tell the difference. Well, that's the end of chapter 15. Let me know what you thought of this chapter in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.